Welcome to Module B2 of the NATMed Training Program, dedicated to citizen engagement and co-design procedures in the implementation of full water cycle, nature-based solutions. The module introduces the participatory processes used in NATMed, where knowledge creation is treated as a mutual learning journey rather than a one-way flow of information. By the end of this module, you will have a clear understanding of how to identify, map, and analyze stakeholders in order to support effective engagement in nature-based solutions projects. You will also learn the purpose and structure of a participatory governance plan, with a particular focus on different levels of participation and on the key steps needed to support collaborative and transparent decision-making. Finally, we will explore how a Mediterranean community of practice is formed and how it is used to co-design, evaluate, and refine nature-based solutions through iterative rounds of engagement, learning, and feedback. The participatory process begins with stakeholder mapping and analysis to understand local perceptions, needs, and barriers, forming the foundation for effective engagement in the co-design of full water cycle, nature-based solutions. It then presents the participatory governance plan, which structures how stakeholders are involved at different levels of participation, from informing to empowering, to support inclusive, transparent, and long-term decision-making. Central to this approach is the Mediterranean Community of Practice, a collaborative tool where actors from local case studies exchange experiences and refine nature-based solutions through co-design workshops. This module is designed for a wide range of actors involved in the planning and implementation of nature-based solutions. It is addressed to local authorities and municipalities, who play a central role in local planning and implementation. It also targets regional and national policymakers, as well as water authorities and environmental agencies, who shape regulatory frameworks and strategic priorities. In addition, the module is relevant for researchers and technical experts who provide scientific knowledge and technical support. Finally, it is intended for local communities whose lived experience, needs, and active participation are essential for the success of nature-based solutions. In NATMed, a three-phase stakeholder engagement and analysis methodology was applied to identify key actors, understand their perceptions, and inform effective engagement strategies. The first phase focuses on collecting existing information. During this phase, available social and contextual data are gathered to identify local perceptions, social risks, and stakeholder categories, and to establish an initial understanding of the community context. For example, in NATMed, perceptions were collected through surveys conducted at the start of the project, complemented by insights derived from the first workshop with the Mediterranean Community of Practice. These activities highlighted traditional practices and local challenges and supported the identification of key stakeholder groups across the case studies, including municipalities, cooperatives, and irrigation boards. The second phase consists of semi-structured interviews. In this phase, interviews are conducted with key stakeholders and end users to explore their perceptions and beliefs related to water management and nature-based solutions, as well as barriers, needs, and levels of awareness. In NATMed, these interviews were planned with a diverse range of actors, including farmers, cooperatives, water authorities, environmental NGOs, and also more vulnerable or less represented groups, such as women's cooperatives and immigrant communities. The interviews were intended to reveal not only attitudes towards nature-based solutions, but also cognitive barriers and specific training needs. The third phase focuses on data analysis and strategy development. All collected data are analyzed to identify synergies with project tasks, to support engagement, training, and governance planning, and to identify conceptual gaps in training needs. In NATMed, this involved integrating survey results, interview findings, and Mediterranean Community of Practice outputs to define local training needs. This slide highlights the key actions that support effective stakeholder mapping and analysis. A first important action is to start with existing data. Building on what is already known helps save time and resources, and ensures that new work adds value rather than repeating earlier efforts. Another key action is to combine different methods. Using both quantitative and qualitative approaches allows projects to capture not only measurable trends, but also deeper insights into perceptions, experiences, and social dynamics. It is also essential to align engagement planning with governance processes. This helps ensure that stakeholder input is connected to real decision making and supports inclusive and transparent governance. Identifying training needs early is another critical step. Doing so allows capacity building programs to be adapted to local realities and stakeholder expectations. Finally, stakeholder analysis should be treated as an ongoing process. Continuous refinement and regular updates help ensure that engagement strategies remain relevant as the project evolves. Alongside these actions, there are several common pitfalls that should be avoided in stakeholder engagement and analysis. One key pitfall is relying only on a single method, such as surveys or interviews alone. This can result in a partial or biased understanding of the social context. Another frequent issue is engaging stakeholders too late in the process. When engagement starts after key decisions are already made, opportunities to influence design and build ownership are often missed. It is also important to avoid assuming that all stakeholder groups have the same needs or capacities. Such assumptions can lead to misaligned training activities or ineffective communication. Poor documentation of stakeholder perceptions and barriers is another challenge. Without proper documentation, it becomes difficult to compare case studies or to support evidence-based decision-making. Finally, a critical pitfall is failing to integrate engagement findings into governance processes. When this happens, engagement remains a formal exercise and does not influence real decisions or project outcomes. This next section introduces the concept of participatory governance plan, a guiding framework that structures how stakeholders are actively involved in decision-making processes related to nature-based solutions. The plan outlines clear steps, roles, and levels of participation. Its purpose is to ensure inclusive, equitable, and context-sensitive collaboration, from the early definition of problems through to implementation and long-term maintenance. In practice, a participatory governance plan helps strengthen institutional coordination across different agencies, levels of government, and community actors. It also creates flexible structures that can adapt over time as socio-ecological conditions evolve. Importantly, it addresses key barriers to the uptake of nature-based solutions, which are often social, institutional, or governance-related rather than purely technical. The plan is built around different levels of participation. These range from informing, which involves one-way communication, to consulting, where inputs are gathered but influence remains limited. Higher levels include collaborating through structured dialogue and joint activities, and co-deciding, where decision-making and planning responsibilities are shared. At the highest level, empowering communities gain long-term agency, involvement, and influence. In general, moving towards higher levels of participation leads to stronger stakeholder ownership, deeper social learning, and more effective long-term outcomes for nature-based solutions. In NATMed, each case study area developed its own governance plan, ensuring transparency, long-term responsibility, and adaptive management throughout implementation and maintenance of the solutions. This slide outlines practical actions that support effective participatory governance for nature-based solutions. A key first step is to define internal goals clearly, ensuring that project teams are aligned on objectives, roles, and expectations before engaging external stakeholders. Following a structured stakeholder mapping practice helps identify who should be involved, when, and in what capacity. Based on this, it is important to select the appropriate level of participation, ranging from informing to empowering, taking into account the local context and the capacities of different groups. During co-design processes, responsibilities should be clearly defined to avoid misunderstandings and conflicts later on. At the same time, a communication plan should be developed to support transparency and ongoing dialogue throughout all project stages. Testing nature-based solutions on a small scale before full implementation is another important action, as it helps reduce risk and refine designs based on real-world feedback. Finally, planning for maintenance should start early, including financing, monitoring roles, and accountability structures, and governance arrangements should be reviewed and adapted continuously as the project evolves. Alongside these actions, there are several governance-related pitfalls that should be avoided. One common mistake is assuming that a single participation model will work across all contexts. Participation needs to be adapted to local, institutional, social, and cultural conditions. Another pitfall is treating participation as a one-off event rather than an ongoing process. This can lead to disengagement and missed opportunities for learning and adaptation. Top-down decision-making, or participation processes without a clear decision-making structure can also undermine trust and effectiveness. Similarly, tokenistic engagement, such as one-off consultations with no real influence, often creates resistance rather than support. Institutional barriers should not be underestimated. Low administrative flexibility or rigid procedures can significantly limit what is possible if they are not acknowledged early. Finally, engaging too few stakeholder groups, neglecting long-term maintenance responsibilities, or failing to ensure meaningful participation for vulnerable or less equipped groups can result in conflict, exclusion, and the long-term degradation of nature-based solutions. The NATMed Mediterranean Community of Practice, or MEDCOP, is a multi-actor ecosystem designed to enable participatory and transdisciplinary co-design of full water cycle nature-based solutions. Its main objective is to foster mutual learning, shared understanding, and the co-creation of water management solutions that are sensitive to local contexts and needs. The MEDCOP brings together a wide range of actors, including public authorities and policymakers, water infrastructure managers, actors from the water and agro-food sectors, researchers and academics, civil society organizations, vulnerable groups, and the general public. It is intentionally designed to be inclusive, taking into account differences in gender, age, and social background. In doing so, it moves away from traditional top-down planning approaches and instead supports collaborative governance. Participation within the MEDCOP is organized across 3 levels. Core stakeholders are fully involved in all co-design phases and decision-making processes. Active members contribute to specific activities, support knowledge exchange, and help with replication. External stakeholders form a broader audience, mainly engaged through dissemination and learning activities, with the potential to support upscaling in the future. The co-design process in the MEDCOP was organized through 3 structured workshops, following a common framework across all case studies. The first and second co-design workshops took place before implementation, while the third session was organized after implementation. The first co-design workshop introduced the project's overall objectives and vision. Participants then engaged in a multi-step process tailored to each case study, including validating the proposed intervention area, reviewing the current status of local water management infrastructure, and collectively analyzing potential nature-based solutions along with their associated challenges. The second co-design workshop deepened the process by aligning the vision of the full water cycle nature-based solutions with local needs and aspirations. This session focused on identifying strengths, weaknesses, and key obstacles to implementation, while also integrating traditional conservation practices into the design. Stakeholders worked through structured participatory exercises, such as the 5 bold steps, SOAR analysis, and storyboarding, to explore both technical and legislative aspects of the proposed solutions. The third co-design workshop took place after implementation and focused on evaluation and adaptive management. During this session, stakeholders assessed the implemented solutions, reflected on their performance, and provided concrete feedback to refine them further. Tools such as the critical friend approach, I wish, what if, and pilot appraisal were used to strengthen stakeholder ownership and support learning for future improvements. This slide highlights key actions that support an effective community of practice and co-design process. Stakeholders should be engaged early and continuously, so they can help shape objectives, priorities, and solutions from the outset. Building local ownership is essential and requires transparent, trust-based processes where stakeholder input is clearly reflected in decision-making. Targeted capacity building, especially for local authorities and technical staff, helps address gaps in knowledge related to nature-based solutions. Using iterative co-design workshops supports continuous learning and gradual refinement of solutions. Clear and consistent communication, including sharing materials in advance and explaining the value of participation, helps maintain engagement over time. Finally, blending scientific, policy, and traditional knowledge through skilled facilitation supports shared understanding, while documenting lessons learned and ensuring inclusive participation strengthens long-term stewardship and supports replication. There are also several pitfalls that can undermine the effectiveness of a community of practice. Late stakeholder involvement reduces ownership and trust, while top-down decision-making contradicts the collaborative nature of a MEDCOP. Overly technical discussions and insufficient preparation can exclude non-experts and weaken participation. Ignoring traditional knowledge or applying rigid facilitation approaches without adapting to local contexts can also limit effectiveness. Assuming equal time or motivation among stakeholders, combined with weak communication, often leads to disengagement. Finally, skipping the evaluation phase undermines learning, improvement, and opportunities for replication. With this, we conclude the Module B2 on citizen engagement and co-design procedures. For access to all NATMed training modules and other useful resources, please visit our website. Thank you for your attendance.